Elizabeth is going to be answering all of our questions this evening at the end after she goes through her slide deck and all of the information she wants to share. So please, if you have questions, you can pop them in the Q&A now, but we will not get to them until the very end of the session. And if you'd like to join future events with Devant, either our immigration Q&As with Elizabeth or some of our job search related topics, you can sign up at devant.ca/all-events. And without further ado, I will pass it over to you, Elizabeth. Oh, wait, one more slide. Sorry. If this is your first Devant event, it is our goal to help students and graduates get hired in Canada. So we want you to be able to stay in Canada and work after you graduate from school. We've helped over 25,000 job seekers from all across Canada. We have hosted over 500 events just like this one, and we have partnerships with 30 plus Canadian employers with active job opportunities that we can help you get connected to. And that is my final slide. I will pass it over to you, Elizabeth. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Keelan. So today what we're going to do first is we're going to go over some of the basics that you guys need to know in order to keep your status, extend your status, apply for the postgrad work permit. Then we're going to go into our special topic for this evening, which is to talk about the Ontario Provincial Nominee Program, or the OINP. Okay, so first of all, extending your status. All of you, if you are a student or if you're a worker, international student, international worker, you will have a study permit or work permit, which will have an end date on it. That means that you, without doing anything beforehand, your status will end on that date. Now, if you did apply to extend your status before your study permit or work permit expires, and the IRCC website recommends that you do this 30 days before, but it's a recommendation, it's not the law. The law is as long as you file it before your status expires, even if it's the day of, don't leave it until the day of, please. You know, leave some time because sometimes the system glitches. But even if you apply that time, you can continue on your status. You extend your status. You have what is called maintained or implied status until a decision is made. Okay, now very importantly, your implied status is only there if you don't leave Canada. If you leave Canada while you're on implied status, that means your status on your study permit or your work permit has expired, but you applied before, so you get that implied status, and you haven't received your new document yet. If you applied during that time period, you lose your implied status. Okay, so don't leave Canada. You stay in Canada until a decision is made on your document. Okay, now what if you forget? Okay, what happens then? Well, if you forget and your status has elapsed, you have 90 days from the date when your status was completed to file a restoration of status. Okay, now unlike the period of time when you were on implied status, let's say you applied to extend your study permit and you have implied status, you can continue to study until your new study permit comes. But if you forgot to extend your study permit, even if you apply the day after, you can apply to restore your status. You can stay in the country, but you won't be able to study because at that time, while you are waiting for the restoration of status to be issued, you lose your status. Okay, so very importantly, make sure you apply before your current status expires, and make sure you don't leave the country until you get your new document. Okay, studying and working on a study permit. First of all, the law requires you to actively pursue your studies. Okay, so what do I mean when I say actively pursue your studies? That means that you are going to school and you are attending classes, you're undertaking your final exams, right? If at any time you are no longer enrolled as a as a student, you can be a part-time, so you can still be active. You won't lose your status. But if you're no longer enrolled as a student, you lose your status after 90 days. Okay. Now, there are two exceptions to that rule. Scheduled breaks, so breaks that everybody in your program gets, it's part of the academic calendar. Those are not counted. You're still actively studying then. And authorized leave. So authorized leave is very personal to you. If, for example, you have a personal situation such as, let's say, a medical situation, and you just can't do your studies in that semester, what you can do is go to your school, let them know what your situation is, and ask them to give you authorized leave for that semester. You can only get authorized leave for 150 days. After that, then that's it. You will have to file an extension, visitor status, etc. for not going back to school. But you can get up to one semester off, 150 days off, and still keep your student status if you get authorized leave from the school. Now, let's talk about working while you're studying. You can only work when you are a full-time student, except in the last semester. In the last semester, you can be a part-time student and you can work, okay? But every other time, you have to be a full-time student. Of course, if you're on your scheduled breaks, that's fine. You can work full-time. While you're studying now, we're back to the normal hours of 20 hours a week, okay? When you complete your studies, when the school gives you the first indication that you have met all of the requirements of your program, whether it's you getting a transcript, whether it's you getting that letter from the school, at that point, you are no longer a student and you have to stop working, okay? Otherwise, you are going to be working illegally, all right? Now, there is an exception to the rule, which is if you're in between programs. Let's say I've completed my undergrad, and I'm going to do I completed my undergrad in April, and I'm going to do my master's in September. In between that summer, I've already been accepted to the master's program. Then I can work in between those two programs in the summer in between. And it's up to 150 days. So it's only one semester in between those two programs. But you have to be accepted to the second program before you can start working. All right, let's talk about the post-grad work permit. Post-grad work permit is really a golden ticket for you guys. It is one of the best work permits that you can get because it is an open work permit and you can get it quite easily, okay? But just because you can get this work permit easily doesn't mean you can just extend or get another work permit, okay? I'm not even adding the word easily. You may not be able to get another work permit, period, okay, depending on your circumstances. So make sure that you are making the most out of the post-grad work permit. The first question you should ask yourself is not how do I get the work permit, but should I apply for the post-grad work permit? Because you can only get one post-grad work permit in your lifetime. Now, if you were to do a program of 8 months to 12 months, let's say a 1-year program, you only get a 1-year work permit. If it was a 2-year program, you get a 3-year work permit. Or if you're doing a master's now, you can also get a 3-year work permit. Or you can combine your programs. If 1 + 1, you can get a 3-year work permit, okay? So oftentimes the 1-year work permit may not give you enough time. I say may because some people, you may not need it, but other people, if you need to have certain amount of work experience in order to get permanent residence, the 1 year may make it very dicey and you may not be able to get enough work experience that you need in order to get permanent residence. So before you actually apply for the postgrad work permit, it's always a good idea to actually seek advice on your immigration plan, to have it pretty clear in your head what you can do and what you need to do in order to get permanent residence. Some of the things that you need to understand about the postgrad work permit is it's very heavily dependent on what you do when you're studying. So things like distance education program, make sure you're not online over 50% of the time, because that could disqualify you from the postgrad work permit. Similarly, the full-time status is essential except in the last semester. So if you were to, let's say you feel like, oh, I'm gonna fail this course, I might as well just drop it so it doesn't show up on my transcript and make it difficult for me to find a job, for example. But that dropping that course midway through your semester, if it takes you down to a part-time student, that could be fatal to your ability to get a postgrad work permit. Okay, so make sure, if as an immigration lawyer, I would say to you, well, if you don't want to do another study program in order to get the postgrad work permit, even if you had that F on your transcript, but it shows that you actually attended the courses, you would still be eligible for the postgrad work permit. So it's better if you had an F on your transcript, or hopefully not an F or C or D, than for you to have 3 courses and show that, which means that you're a part-time student. Okay. Finally, with regards to when you should apply for your postgrad work permit. So the website, it says you can apply 180 days, okay, after your postgrad work permit. But I'm here to tell you that it's best for you to apply within 90 days of you completing your program. Why is that? It's because you lose your status if you are if you are beyond the 90 days of completing your program. And in order to work while you're waiting for your work permit to be issued, you need to have a valid study permit and valid student status. That's why the date in which you need to know as your deadline is the earliest of when your study permit expires, or the 90 days after the completion of your program, whichever comes first. Okay, let's take a quick timeline, look at the timeline about when you complete your studies, because this is often quite confusing. So when you're writing your final exams, can you work? Yes, you're still a full-time student, you can work. When you're waiting for the results of your final exams, can you work? Yes, you're still a full-time student. There's no confirmation from the school yet that you completed your program. So yes, you can work then. Okay, the school has notified you that you've completed the program. At that point, you're no longer a full-time student. You have to stop working. Okay, you can't work full-time, you can't work part-time. You can't work based on your co-op work permit, because a co-op work permit only allows you to work in a program that is integral to your studies. So after you've completed your studies, you're no longer working as part of your program that's part of your studies. Okay, so you cannot work at that point until you submitted your application for your postgrad work permit. And if you do so within 90 days of the completion of your program, the first notification of your program, and when your study permit is still valid, whichever comes first. If you submit it, then at that time you can start working full-time hours, no limit to the amount of hours you can work. All right. Now let's go to our special topic today, which is the Ontario Immigrant Nominee Program. So the Ontario Provincial Nominee Program is one of those provincial nominee programs. What are provincial nominee programs anyway? Provincial nominee programs come from agreements made between the province and the federal government. The federal government is in charge of immigration. And so the federal government has, however, made agreements with each and every province to allow each province to determine who exactly they would like to select to get permanent residence. Okay. And so what happens is first, the province like Ontario determines that a certain person should get permanent residence. They nominate you as a permanent resident. Once you get the nomination from the province, then you're able to apply for permanent residence with the federal government. And normally, because you get the nomination, the federal government doesn't do the selection anymore. What the federal government does is they look mainly at things like criminality, medical admissibility, things like that, okay? And then the federal government issues the permanent residence, but you go through the Ontario government, so you've been selected through the province. So one of the things that you have to understand about provincial nominee programs is they only have a certain number of people that they can select. There are certain quotas issued to each province. And as such, the province guards their numbers quite jealously. They are interested only in people who intend to reside in their province. If you indicate to them that you're not going to reside in their province, if you apply for the OIMP and you say, oh, actually, you move out of the province, and you don't give a good reason for why you're moving out and not being in the province, right? Then even if you've been nominated by the OIMP and you're just waiting for your permanent residence to be issued, if you've gone to another province, likely what will happen is your entire application could be rejected. Okay, so if you are applying under a provincial nomination, you should plan to stay in that province, or if you're not able to stay because of your status and you need to leave the country, you can leave the country, but you need to give a good reason for leaving the country. And you should also plan to return back to the province and give every indication that you will return back to the province once you've received your permanent residence. Okay. Now, some people say, well, what if I don't want to stay in Ontario for the rest of my life, right? What do I have to stay here for the rest of my life? Maybe I might want to go to BC afterwards. Well, after you get your permanent residence, certainly people's intentions can change, and you do have a right to change your intention as permanent residents, and you have the charter right to live anywhere you like in the country. So you can go elsewhere after you've gotten your permanent residence. But that's why the government, the provincial government, they do look very closely before you get permanent residence as to your intentions, because they know they can't really control you after you get your permanent residence. All right, so I want to look at some of the main programs with the Ontario government. Now, the OIMP, and it's similar with a lot of other provincial nominee programs, have two very separate kind of categories. One category are the express entry linked programs. So for the express entry streams, if you are nominated under the express entry stream, you will get 600 points added to your express entry application, which basically assures that you're going to be invited to apply, and then you will apply through express entry for your permanent residence. Okay. Then we have non-express entry streams. So with non-express entry streams, once you are nominated under those streams, you don't go through express entry anymore. You don't need to go through express entry anymore. And even if you wanted to, you're not going to get 600 points added to your express entry application. Instead, you would just apply directly for permanent residence. Okay. A lot of times, if you go through the non-express entry applications, they do take longer because the federal government, when you get the nomination, the federal government, to process these provincial nominee programs that are not express entry, may take around 1.5 years, sometimes 2 years to process. Whereas if you're going through express entry, express entry processing time is normally under 6 months. Okay. So let's first talk about the OIMP express entry streams. So first of all, with these streams, the first thing you have to understand is you can't just go and apply directly to the Ontario government for these streams. You have to first create an express entry profile and sit there and wait and see if the government is interested in you. Okay. You guys know the dating app Bumble, right? It's where the men can't contact the women directly. The women, they have to wait until the woman contacts them and then they can respond. Yeah, this is kind of like that. Okay, so the Ontario government is like the women. You can't, and you're like the men. You can't just go and contact the Ontario government and say, hey, I'm interested in you. No. You sit and be in the pool and see if the Ontario government is going to swipe right on you. Okay. And if the Ontario government says, oh, okay, we're really interested, we would like to send you a notification of interest that we're interested in you, then you get to decide whether or not you want to apply with the Ontario government. So who is it that the Ontario government is going to swipe right on? There are 3 main categories. There's the human capital stream. Right now, they are talking about having a bachelor's degree, but they may change that. So for this one, you have to have a bachelor's degree. There is tech draws where they look at your occupations and they have identified certain tech occupations that they really like. And then there are other, sometimes they might invite other occupations like healthcare. They've been inviting a lot of healthcare occupations as well. Okay. So they can basically decide whatever they want to do. And normally as well for these draws, they do have a cutoff number. So for example, for tech draws, they might invite people who are, let's say, 470 and above. Or, so it's a little bit lower than the federal draws, but still you have to have a certain amount of points in order to be invited. Okay. There are the French-speaking one. Again, right now it requires a bachelor's, but they may be changing that. And so you have to have a CLB level of 7 in French and a 6 in English for that. Okay. And the skilled trades. The skilled trades for this one are people who are on a certain, usually it's the construction trades, and bakers are part of them as well. And you have to be in Ontario with a work permit. You have to work for 1 year in Ontario in one of these occupations. And then you can be invited to apply as well. Okay. The cutoff level for the skilled trades is often very, very low, which is very good. The cutoffs for all of these are lower. There is still usually a cutoff, but they're much lower than the regular draws for the government. Okay. All right, so let's talk about non-express entry streams. So the other side of it is the non-express entry streams, where we have 2 kinds of categories. but let me just first talk about how this works. So for these streams, then we have another pool, okay? It's the points are different from express entry. And depending on which stream you're applying for, some of the things could count for certain streams and some of the things won't count for certain streams. So for example, education will count for master's or PhD or international students. Well, actually, master's and PhD, you already have the education. So, but this education will count for the international student, but it won't count for the the federal worker, the foreign worker one. Okay. Age is a really good one. It does not count. It's one of the big dividing factors in express entry, but it doesn't matter at all for these streams. Okay. And so there's different points allocations and for each stream. The draws are a lot less regular than the federal draw. The federal draws normally, I mean, there's always anomalies, but normally it's every 2 weeks or so, they'll have a draw, okay? Ontario, it could be that they don't make any draws for a month or two, and then they have a whole bunch of draws. The selection is based on points, but often it's also based on other criteria like occupation. So for example, they might have a master's stream draw where they are only inviting people who are in the healthcare field. Okay, so even if your points were really high, they're not going to invite you if you don't have a background in healthcare, for example. Okay, so there are two kinds of, like I said, two kinds of streams. There's the master's or PhD streams where you don't need a job offer. And then there is the streams that all depend on a job offer with a qualified employer. So the master's and PhD streams, these are easy to qualify for when you are graduating, but not necessarily easy to get selected because so many people can qualify and get themselves put into the pool. Okay, so in order to qualify, you have to apply within 2 years of graduation. When I say apply, it's not just put yourself into the pool. It means that you have to be selected, invited to apply, and submit your application within the 2 years of you getting that degree. Okay, no job offer is required, but you should be ready to enter the labor market. That means if you're doing a master's degree, you can't indicate that you're going to, you shouldn't go into the PhD program. If you do that, they're going to say you're not ready to enter the job market. So sorry, we're not going to allow you, you're not allowed, you don't qualify for this program, okay? You also have to show your intention to reside in Ontario. So if you, move outside of the province and you're not in the province, likely you won't be able to show that you intend to reside in Ontario, and you probably shouldn't bother because your application would likely be rejected. Okay, you have to have legal status. So for those of you who might have used up your postgrad work permit, right, and you don't get another postgrad work permit for your master's or PhD, what do? Well, you can try to keep your visitor status, maybe apply for another kind of work permit like a postdoc or something with an LMIA. We can talk more about other kinds of work permits. I think we have in another YouTube topic, or you can come to us and we can talk about that. Or you can leave the country and go, and you can still qualify if you meet all the other criteria, including that you have resided in Ontario for at least 1 year in the last 2 years prior to your application. And finally, you do need to hold settlement funds, enough funds to keep your, that the government says that you can, live on for a year, or if you have a job or job offer in Ontario. And for the masters, you have to get the CLB7 in the language test, which shouldn't be an issue for any of you. Okay. But like I said, just because you qualify, it doesn't mean that it's the best one for you to apply, because depending on your circumstances, and circumstances could be things like, what did you study? Where did you study? Right? And what's your English test results, etc. Okay. So all of these kind of things could play into what your points are, and also what your occupation is as well could come into play as well. Okay, now let's talk about the employer-based programs. The employer-based programs are, first of all, meant to help employers keep their workers. Okay, I just recently had a discussion with some of the senior policy makers in Ontario, and they stressed to us that these programs are not made just to allow applicants to get permanent residence. These programs are made for the benefit of the employers. So for a lot of people, sometimes you think that it's a good idea, you might think it's a good idea just to put yourself into the pool. And if you get invited, you can just tell the employer, I have 14 days to submit the application, and I just need to, I need you to fill out this form and do it. And a lot of times the employers might refuse to do it. And you might feel like, hey, why are you, just not helping me and not doing this? Well, it's because, for a few reasons. I'll tell you why. First, your employer may not even qualify. To qualify for this program, your employer, if you're outside of the Greater Toronto area, they have to have a gross income of 500,000 in the last fiscal year, have 3 full-time Canadian or permanent resident employees in the location where you're working, and be in business for at least 3 years. Inside Ontario, they have to be in business for 3 years, have 5 full-time Canadian or permanent resident employees in the location where you're working, and have a gross income of over $1 million. So that's number one. Number two, the employer is required to share a lot of sensitive information, like tax documents, payroll information, that they may not be comfortable sharing with employees. Most employers I have found are not that comfortable sharing this information with the employees. And that's where lawyers become very useful, because as lawyers, we have what's called solicitor-client privilege. And that is something that even the courts cannot force us to reveal information where it's confidential for our clients. So we can act as a firewall where the employer gives us the documentation. We don't show it to you because you don't care. You just want to get the PR, okay? And we submit the information directly to the government. That makes a lot of employers much more comfortable with applying under these circumstances, under this. But you have to give the employers time to absorb this, to discuss it amongst senior management, in order to be willing for many employers to help you, okay? So before you put yourself into the pool, you should already have the permission by the employer where they're willing to help you, where they're willing to support you in this case, okay? So there are 3 categories whereby a person might qualify. So the employer qualifies, they give the person a full-time, at least 30 hours a week, permanent job offer, okay, in Ontario. Now, for the international student stream, these are for people who have completed 2 years, a 2-year program or a 1 year program that is Ontario post graduate certificate. Okay. So if you meet that criteria and you apply within 2 years of your graduation, your salary only needs to meet entry level wage, not the median wage, entry level wage, and you don't need to have any work experience. The job has to be high skilled, but you don't need to have work experience in order to do this. The second one is the skilled worker one. Okay, so this one, it has to be high skilled, but the salary needs to meet median wage. It doesn't, you don't have to have any sort of education in Canada. You don't even need to have any sort of education anywhere. It doesn't really count for even points. But your salary has to meet the median wage, and you have to have 2 years of work experience in the last 5 years in the occupation. And finally, we have the in-demand stream. This is the only low-skilled permanent residence streams. And in order to apply for this, you have to have at least 9 months of work experience in Ontario in one of the listed occupations. There's a lot of manufacturing or farm workers, or where you're working as a in-home personal support worker, where you're not working in a nursing home because that's high skilled. You're working for within someone's home. Okay, so these are the in-demand stream. You have to have 9 months of work experience. Wage has to meet median wage, and then you can also be selected for that as well. Okay, so we've talked a lot about different programs. Here are some of the things that I would advise you to keep in mind. Okay, first of all, before you just decide, okay, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. I've told you some things, but there's a lot of things out there that, you have to think about. I would highly recommend that you either come to us or go to another immigration lawyer, not consultant, okay, consultants don't have law degrees. Go to an immigration lawyer who is specializing in immigration, and go and get a plan of what you need to do in order to get permanent residence, if that is your goal. Okay. Once you have the plan, well, then you have to execute. And execution is not necessarily always that simple. You may have to study really hard for your exams. It used to be, study hard for the English. Now, maybe some of you might want to study hard for French even. Okay. Make sure that the programs, now more than ever, these points for express entry are so extraordinarily high that 1 year of work experience may not be enough. So if you just do a 1 year program and you get a 1 year work permit, you would have had all this effort and you're not going to get permanent residence. So make sure you know what you need to do, and you may need to do a second program. Make your decisions on that. Okay. And make sure you know how to get your work permits. If your postgrad work permit is not going to be enough, what can you do in order to extend your time? Make sure that you stay in status and don't misrepresent. It becomes a very big temptation sometimes when someone goes to you and say, hey, you know what? They won't know. Immigration won't know. Don't worry about it. You just pay me some money. I can make it happen. Don't worry. Okay. Well, you should worry, because if immigration finds out that you have misrepresented, then you could be barred from Canada for 5 years. And afterwards, good luck trying to, come back. Okay. Also, you even if you get your permanent residence, you might not sleep very well at night, because at any point, even if you get your citizenship, you could have your citizenship and permanent residence stripped from you because of past misrepresentation. Okay. Staying in status, one of the main things that I talked to you about is staying in status, because once you get out of status, especially if you're beyond the restoration timeline, then you get into this realm of being inadmissible in Canada and trying to right that wrong. For example, trying to apply for provincial nomination like the OIMP, you're not going to be eligible to do that. Okay, so make sure you understand your pathway and how you can properly stay in status as well. Finally, if your application is rejected, and there's a lot of things with AI these days, and there's more than ever applications that are unreasonably rejected, you need to contact a lawyer right away, not a consultant, a lawyer, because only lawyers can go to federal court. And there are strict timelines. If you get your application rejected in Canada, within Canada, it's only 15 days. If it's outside of Canada, 60 days. If you don't file it within that period of time, then you lose out on your opportunity to have an objective judge look at your application and see if the reasons were reasonable or not. Also, if you call the call center and the call center says to you, oh yeah, I'm just gonna write a note in there and or you can just write a letter, don't worry, just write a letter and tell them why you think that you should get your work permit. And you do so, and you don't really know what to say, and the officer takes one look at it and says, reject. Then you come to me and say, oh, Elizabeth, you know what? I think I need your help now. It's too late, because you only get one kick at the can for reconsiderations. What you did when you wrote back to the officer is called a reconsideration. And even if I wanted to, even if I were to help you to submit the reconsideration, they wouldn't even look at what I'm writing at that point, because they said, oh, you already had your one chance at reconsideration. There are also other things like timelines, for example, okay, for restoration of status, 90 days, post-grad work permit, 180 days if you get a rejection, etc. So make sure, don't lose any time. Just go and contact a lawyer right away, okay? All right, so we have a few minutes left. Let's go through some questions. Oh, and sorry, before we start, here is my contact information for our law firm. Email us. I think that's the best way to if you wanted to have a consultation to go over your options, let us know that you've come from Devant, and we will give you a student discount for the consultation. It's only $100 to do the consultation, and we'll give you a plan at the end of it. Okay. Thank you.
Perfect. That was actually going to be my first question, Elizabeth. So a lot of people have asked how they can book a session with you and what the fees are. So I'm glad you started off with that. We have 27 questions, and unfortunately not enough time to answer them all. So I'm just going to start from the beginning.
Okay.
So Elizabeth, we have Sharif. He has received his visa. And he's now in Canada studying for his master's degree. However, his wife and daughter will be joining them next year. Are there any conditions for their traveling to Canada? Are they required to enter before their degree completion, or can they join any time before the expiration of visa validity? Their spouse is on an open work permit visa. Their daughters are on open study permits, and they plan to apply for a post-grad work permit after their master's.
So technically speaking, yes, they can come in anytime before the letter of introduction expires. However, I have had a case similar to this where it was a very disturbing case where at Air Canada, they were at the Air Canada counter. The Air Canada employee called the CBSA and just decided to cancel because they came like within a month or two before the expiration because they didn't believe that my client was actually going to be in Canada to do this. So I wouldn't leave it until the very end. You know, we sorted it out in the end, but you just don't want to get yourself into that situation. You should probably come, you know, within a reasonable period of time after the approval, and at least get them to activate their work permit and study permit. And then if they wanted to go back and forth, they could go back and forth, but I would activate it within, you know, a couple, 2 or 3 months or so after they've been issued.
Perfect. Thank you. Next question. As an international student, when would you say is the best time to start the permanent residence process?
There's no good answer to this until I actually meet with you. Maybe you might be able to do so right now, right? And maybe you might not be able to do so until later. So come for a consultation and then we'll go over that.
Perfect. On the interim postgrad work permit document given on submission of application, they give an end date for work permit allowance or until a decision is made. Does this mean you are not able to keep working past the date on the document?
Okay, so this is one of my pet peeves. And by the way, we're very active on social media. I made a video about this because it is one of the most annoying things I see that IRCC does. Okay, so this letter that they gave you has this random date that they just put on there. Okay, this random date doesn't mean anything. I don't know. I think they put it on there just to sort of give something to OHIP as to how long they want the OHIP should be issuing, you know, the more OHIP or something like that. But don't pay attention to that date. If you go on the IRCC website, they actually say, if your decision has not been made by the time this date arises, you can continue to work or study until a decision is made. And that is the law. You can continue to work or study until a decision is made. Your status is not dependent on that date. But the annoying thing about this letter is it kind of makes it seem like, you know, your status will end on that date. You can only work until that date, which is why it's very annoying.
Thank you for the clarification. That does sound confusing and annoying. All right. Tony recently graduated from Centennial College. Congratulations, Tony. They've applied for their 1-year postgrad work permit and received deemed approval. They also recently resumed full-time permanent job. They're mature professional with several decades of overseas experience. They're worried that their express entry points may not be great. And they'd like to know what their options are to retain full-time permanent jobs after their 1-year postgrad work permit expires, and then also how they could get PR eventually.
So, you know, all of this will need to have a consultation. There are a lot of different ways we can deal with not having enough points for express entry. One of the ways might be OIMP, but there are other things that we can do. I think we did an episode recently on that. Go to that YouTube and you can take a look. But I think better is if you come and we do a consult and we do a plan for you.
Perfect. All right. This person's study permit and co-op work permit along with visa end date is April 2025, but their program goes until December 2025. So they're wondering if they need to upload documents in the same application as earlier, or if there's any steps to be followed after uploading the letter from the college and the IRCC website.
Yeah, so if your study permit and work permit expire early before your program ends, go and file that extension. You probably, normally I would say file it around 5 months, 4 or 5 months before the expiry. If it's too early, they sometimes refuse to process if it's too early, but 5, 6 months, maybe 4 or 5 months, submit it and get your extension.
Perfect. This next one is very broad. What is the worst case scenario when you work before you're starting studies?
So if you work before you start your studies, that's actually illegal work. And when you apply for your work permit or your study permit or your anything in immigration, really, they ask you, well, yeah, they ask you any of the temporary status, they ask you, have you ever worked without authorization? And, if you hire a lawyer like me and you tell me I worked without authorization, I have to say worked without authorization on the form. And then what happens is an officer is actually not allowed to issue you a work permit if you worked within 6 months of without authorization. And even after that, they can also deny because they feel like you're not going to obey the laws of Canada because of your past behavior. Okay. So certainly that is not something that I would recommend.
Thank you, Elizabeth. This person's received deem approval for their 1-year post-grad work permit, but they already have a full-time job. They're wondering if they need to travel outside of Canada while waiting for their post PGWP. Can they travel and return? Do they have to apply for another TRV permit to travel overseas and return to Canada?
First of all, I don't know what they mean by deemed approval. There's no such thing as deemed approval. They might think that they have approval if they get a letter saying that their work permit extension that's not a deemed approval. You only get approved, you get a letter saying that your application has been approved, and then you're waiting for your the actual work permit to be issued. If that's the case, then you can travel, return, because when you get that letter saying that it's already been approved, then basically, in my book, you have been approved. Although I would try to wait until the work permit is in hand because you have to show it to the officer when you return. If you, with the work permit though, that doesn't necessarily mean that you can just travel outside of Canada and return without a TRV. Okay, so for certain people, a lot of people don't need visas to enter Canada. You have your ETAs that are issued directly with the work permit. But for those people who are from visa requiring countries, you can only go within Canada and going to the States and return without a visa. If you are going to go anywhere else, you need a visa in order to return back to Canada. So after you get the work permit, which is issued in Canada, you'll have to apply for a visa in order to return back to Canada. And the visa will be based on your work permit. It's normally issued for the same length of time as your work permit.
Thank you. All right, we've got about 4 minutes. We'll do a couple more. Can a work permit be extended if I only got 2 years and not 3 years due to passport expiry?
Yes. So that's one of the only circumstances where your postgrad work permit, you can ask for an extension. If you're entitled to a 3-year work permit, let's say you did a 2-year work permit, 2-year program, you got a 3-year work permit, and it was shortened because of the passport, you can apply to extend your work permit that way.
Fantastic. Can a student permit holder show Tier 4 job letter and pay stubs to extend a spousal open work permit along with the post-grad work permit application?
Yes. Under new legislation, or not legislation, but new policies, it no longer is a requirement that you have a high-skilled job in order to get a spousal work permit. You are able, for the most part, to be able to get a spousal work permit if your spouse has a post-grad work permit and a low-skilled job as well.
Right. Can I add my child without a job offer? And can I add my spouse after I get a job, but his spousal open work permit expires in less than 30 days?
So this 30 days thing, like I said, is not a thing in law. Okay. This is just a recommendation by the government. You can apply to extend someone's status. You have implied status, even if you apply the day of or the day before. You still have implied status as long as you show that you submitted it properly. Okay. Can you add your child without a job offer? You can when you say add your child, you mean file an extension for your child's application? You can file an extension for your child's application for a study permit or visitor extension. Yes, you can, but you will have to show that you have enough funds to support them in that situation.
All right. And last question. If they get a job offer in a different province from where they were schooled, is it advisable to apply for a different PMP program?
Yes. Don't apply. If you're not going to be in Ontario, if your job is not going to be in Ontario, don't bother applying in Ontario because your application will be denied if you do so. You can look at the provincial nominee program in the place that you're going to go to, or you can also look at other programs as well, like Express Entry, which is a federal program. The only thing you don't do is don't go to Quebec, because in Quebec, if you don't speak any French, you're not going to get permanent residence. You're not going to be entitled to access federal programs like Express Entry as well. Okay.
All right. It is just about 8 o'clock. I apologize to everyone whose questions we did not get to answer, but Elizabeth's information was on the screen. Please feel free to send her an email. Follow Long Mango G, all of their Instagram accounts. They post really excellent videos and content there. And remember, if you are booking a session with Elizabeth, remember to say that you came from Devant and you will get that student discount for the $100 session. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for all of your wonderful knowledge. And we are looking forward to seeing you next time. And the recording will be sent out probably tomorrow or the next day. And you can see all of Elizabeth's previous sessions on our YouTube channel as well.
Thank you so much, Keelan. It's so great to be here. And I just wanted to say to all of you, it's definitely a difficult road to get permanent residence more than ever. But please do try to do it, because in Canada, we definitely need people like you to stay in Canada. You've come so far already. I really do hope that you guys make it. All right. Thank you guys so much. Take care.
Thank you. Have a good evening.